Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit of the WoW podcast, Blue Please on CynicalBrit.com. This is a Wipe-a-thon 3000 presentation for Alysrazor. I believe that's the way to pronounce it. This is the third boss, supposedly, in the one and the only Firelands, patch 4.2. And I say the one and the only because it's the only bloody raid you're getting in 4.2. Enjoy that. One of the smallest raid tiers we've ever had. Now, we had a lot of problems on the PTR with this boss due to various issues, including frequent disconnections and all sorts of nonsense, so we were unable to get this boss down. However, I do have quite a bit of footage I can show you right here, including, of course, the introduction to this. Now, my PTR client currently has broken sound as well. A lot of this does have voice acting. Unfortunately, I do not have the ability to show it to you, which is quite disappointing, but you do see a rather spectacular entrance to this third boss, which is a giant firehawk. Now, the encounter journal has been put into the game, so a lot of people had a vague idea of what they were doing when they went into this fight, and it certainly does help, but there is an awful lot you still need to figure out, however, with this particular encounter. So, don't assume that having the encounter journal is going to make this an absolute walkover. Now, on the European PTR, those who didn't have the frequent disconnection bugs and were actually able to get into the dungeon were able to down this boss fairly easily. This is the US version of the PTR, where the boss was buffed significantly. Her HP has been increased by, I believe, about 50%, and also Phase 2 has a lot more fire tornadoes, and it seems to be an awful lot harder to actually avoid them by simply hiding in the corner. So, I don't know how many other buffs there are, if any, but there you go. So, here's an explanation of mechanics. So, when you go to Phase 1, she's going to do raid damage, and then she's going to land. Now, you can pick up these things called molten feathers, and when you pick up a molten feather, you will gain a speed buff. When you gain 3, you will go airborne. You will gain fire wings or something along those lines. Now, when you gain these buffs, you will be able to cast all spells while moving, and you'll also notice that she puts down these fiery rings. When you fly through the burning ring of fire, then the flames will get a little higher, and also you will gain some stacking buffs, which will increase your haste, and once you get to 25 of these, if you actually manage it, you will gain a big buff that gives you 50% extra crit for 30 seconds. So that's pretty damn awesome. Now, as you can see, I'm still airborne for this. She will go down on the ground, and she's going to do a little bit of damage, and she's also going to start laying down some more molten flames. Now, this was the first attempt at this encounter, and it's like, oh, look, still standing in the fire. Now, this fire is generated by the initiates. Now, there are initiates of the flame hanging around this place, and as you can see, we're already wiping here. Now, the reason we wiped here, it's actually twofold. The first of those was we were unable to get the ferocious hatchlings, as they're called, over to the lava worms. So there are these big fat lava worms that spawn, and you have to feed them to the ferocious hatchlings. Now, the way that you do that is by dragging the ferocious hatchlings over to them. Now, if they are not fed, they are likely to go into a tantrum and deal massive, massive damage. Now, this is a little bit RNG, because they will enter a state called hungry, whereby there'll be a 20% chance of them going into a tantrum every time you hit them. So you can be lucky and not get hits, or you can be really, really unlucky, which is not so awesome. You can see right there, you saw the lava grubs, the lava worms on the ground, and I have to bring them over there. Unfortunately, the tank did die at this point. Now, the other problem we had with that phase, which continued to be a problem as we figured out what was going on, is that there were too many fire patches on the ground, so these things will move, and that's a lot of raid damage to deal with, and really you shouldn't be having to deal with too much raid damage at all in Phase 1. So what you need to do is to try and assign some DPS to various areas, and we decided by the end, which seemed to work much better, to have them run around in a group clockwise around the arena, picking off those initiates as they flew in. Now, if the faster you kill the initiates, the less fire patches there will be on the ground, which makes avoiding them much, much easier. Now, there is one other thing about these rings of fire that's fairly important, and it's that every time you fly through them, you will gain 4 seconds of additional flight time. So if you fail to do this, then it is very, very easy to fall out of the sky. Now, we had 2 people in the air. I'm not sure what's optimal yet. I think it's 2 because the 6 feathers dropped. So it seems to make sense that you would have to have 2 people. The problem is that you can only pick up a ring with 1 person. So you end up in a situation where things are a little bit hectic and you have to try and alternate the rings to keep your other guy in the air, and you've got to be really, really quick to do that. So I'm still trying to figure out what's the optimal way of doing things. If you do land on the ground, it's not so bad, but I've had attempts where I've been able to stay airborne pretty much all the time simply by going through those rings. You'll notice that I lost my stacking buff there, so we didn't do that one right at all. Now, I had this theory about going 2 rings and then 1 ring, but I think you really should just alternate back and forth on this. That seems to be the way to do it, to make sure that your flight time remains. You can see right there, fell flat on my ass, saved by the blink, which is actually why, in my opinion, you should take a mage up there, because it's just much easier to avoid that kind of damage. You could slow fall if you like, but it means that you take way longer to get back to the ground, which means you're doing nothing remotely useful. Now, we did manage to get to phase 2 there, and bad things will happen, as you are about to see. Oh god, lots and lots of fire. It's not pleasant. Now, on the US version, as far as I can tell, they've buffed this phase, and on the EU version, there were barely any fiery tornadoes at all. And I'll get to show you a longer version of that phase in a future wipe. And it seems that they've added a lot more. So on the EU, all they were doing was just going and hiding in the corner because the tornadoes didn't go anywhere near them. I don't think you can do that anymore. I'm fairly sure you've got to do a little bit of dodging because there are far more tornadoes in this fight now. And also, as I've said, the boss has got about a 50% HP buff, so it's way harder to bring her down and you have way more phases to deal with. Okay, so back we go. Get everyone nice and healed up after this phase, as you can see, because you're going to take a lot of damage on landing. It's going to happen. There's no way to really avoid it. If you happen to have mages, of course, they can ice block, so that's going to take a little bit of strain off of the healers. It's not hard to heal, but it's an initial mana drain that nobody really wants. So there you go. Okay, fly through the ring, no problems at all. You'll notice some fairly odd cuts in this footage because I was frequently disconnecting, as were many other members of the raid, which made doing this nigh on impossible. We did try it anyway, but when you've got your healers randomly DCing, it's a little tricky. Or your tanks, that's always nice. And yes, DCing and then falling from the sky and then dying as you log back in, that's very, very nice. Anyway, the flying mechanics are a little bit odd, but the way to deal with it is to bind auto-run to, say, a spare mouse button, and then just activate it that way, and then strafe left and right so that you don't end up catching up to the Hawk. It seems that you move slightly faster than the Hawk while you're flying, so just strafing left and right will give you the edge that you need. Don't fly too close, because it's too easy to fly into one of those big clouds of fire there, and you will take a lot of damage, and of course you can't really be healed while you're airborne. So if you do end up flying through one of those and you take a lot of damage, then fly close to the ground, ask for a few hots, and then get back into the air. So you can see I'm able to do an awful lot of damage to the boss right here, but it doesn't make a huge amount of difference, really. You can beat on her pretty damn hard, but because she's had a significant health buff, you can see we've maybe taken off 5%. And it's not a huge deal, but it seems to be required. I would recommend doing it nonetheless, even so that you can just try and get a stack of 25, so that when she goes down to the ground phase, you can nuke her really hard. You already get a massive buff in phase 3. So what happens is, after she does the fiery tornado, she gets exhausted, and then phase 3, she's lying on the ground. You beat the snot out of her, because you do tons and tons of damage. In that phase, what you do is you've got the 2 tanks on the 2 druids that come in and try and revive her, doing as many interrupts as possible. She will eventually get back on her feet after she's charged with molten energy, but the more interrupts you can do, the better, because that will prevent her coming up quite as fast. Ouch. Evil fire chickens, kill me. But this is a fairly entertaining fight, certainly, and what I've just described pretty much describes the fight. And you can check out the encounter journal to find out some of the other abilities, like, say, the phase 4 things, the reawakening and stuff like that. I mean, it's not a huge amount beyond that, really. As regards to doing damage to the ferocious hatchlings, what happens is, once you start tanking it, you get imprinted with the hatchling. And that is the only thing the hatchling will ever attack, whoever has the imprint. And once you've done the imprint, you do 1,000% damage. So the tanks are actually doing massive damage. I heard one of our tanks saying that you could actually get a 250,000 revenge crit. No, sorry, not revenge crit. That would be slam, a shield slam. So you can do a massive amount of damage. Those things have about 14 million hit points each. So, to be honest, the DPS shouldn't really be doing too much damage to them. But it seems like it would be beneficial maybe to throw a few dots on them, simply because it's a little bit difficult for the tanks to bring them down on their own, so throw some dots in there certainly, but unless there are absolutely none of the initiates on the field, you shouldn't be doing any damage to them whatsoever. You should be focusing purely on getting the initiates out of the way. It does get a little bit hectic when you're in the air, as you can see right there. A little bit hectic. Gotta dodge as many of those fireballs as possible. Don't want to take a lot of damage. Apparently in the heroic modes, there's going to be way, way more of those clouds, so it's a bit dangerous. And annoyingly enough, I thought I picked it up there, but it looked like I ran out just at the wrong time. I think that pretty much covers it. I'm going to show you what happens on Phase 2 again, so I'm just going to make a cut so that you can see just how intense it is on the US version of this particular encounter, whereas the EU version, they took it down after about 45 minutes. It was beaten by a bunch of guilds. And they decided, well, there's no point testing this anymore. We're going to go buff it a lot. And they did. Okay, here's the entrance to Phase 2. You will lose your wings, by the way, so go close to the ground. You don't want to fall. That seems incredibly stupid. So, as you can see, it says it removes it. There's the drop. She'll spin around a little bit. Don't stand in the middle. You will die instantly. There are a couple more of those fiery rings, but you'll notice there are way, way more tornadoes in this version. Loads more, and dodging this is much harder. Doesn't help when my freaking achievements thing pops up. Seriously, I don't know what that's bound to, but it's obviously bound to something very close to one of my binds, so I need to fix that. But, yeah, there's a lot more tornadoes. It's way, way harder to dodge. Once you've dodged all of that, she will go to the exhaustion phase, and then you just nuke her hard, interrupt those channels as much as possible to delay her reawakening, and then you're pretty much back to what you were doing in the first place. And that is that, folks. That's how the encounter is done. We were not able to bring it down due to frequent disconnections. This was with a group of randoms who, while competent, obviously, they're a group of randoms, so we weren't entirely sure how that would turn out. They seemed to do pretty well, but with healers DCing tanks and DPS all the time with all sorts of nonsense, it was a little bit difficult to bring down. He is hoping that they managed to get the PTRs more stable. This kind of thing has been happening on both US and EU realms pretty much consistently since they opened the 4.2 PTR. It better not be a bug that translates to the live server, that I can guarantee, otherwise people will be very, very upset, and justifiably so. Okay, folks, that has been a look at Alysrazor, and when they do another test, assuming that they actually do, and hopefully we'll be able to bring it down, I can bring you a kill video. I'll try and bring you some more PTR content as much as possible, but just bear in mind the instability of the server is making doing any real guides or boss kill videos extremely difficult, unless you happen to be Method, who are mysteriously not getting these problems. My name is TotalBiscuit, and I will see you next time.